And then with that, I'd love to introduce you to Lee Foster, who will be our speaker today.
All right, good morning, everyone. You can hear me all well. Give me a second here. I'm just going to set something up on this. Just for your awareness, I'm not going to be doing a slideshow for this. This is just kind of my notes to make sure I cover a lot of the bases I want to cover. I will kind of discuss some examples of this. They're easily searchable. If you are interested, just jump on your phone. But if you have any trouble with that, just reach out to me after. I'll be happy to point you in the right direction. So, my name is Lee Foster. I am, according to the slide, adjunct faculty, which isn't particularly informative, I know, so a bit more in the way of background. I'm a faculty member at the Alperovitch Institute for Cybersecurity Studies at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where I teach on threat intelligence and information operations. I'm also the former director of information operations analysis at Mandiant, where I founded and led the team that specializes in investigating and exposing cyber-enabled influence operations. So this is kind of something I've been studying for a lot of my career now. And I've been watching kind of the threat space evolve. So I had key motivation for my talk here. And it's this. Gen AI has obviously become kind of a mainstream topic of conversation, particularly over the past year. With kind of the massive kind of releases of open source tooling and services such as ChatGPT and so on. And as that has happened, many have raised the specter of generative AI being leveraged by hostile state actors for the purpose of conducting online influence operations. I feel like that conversation has tended towards the extreme and often depicts this as kind of an existential threat that omits important nuance. And so my hope today is really to make a convincing case that Gen AI is indeed a serious threat as it pertains to cyber-enabled info ops, and it will continue to grow. But importantly, I want to bring some nuance to this conversation and demonstrate kind of why the extreme rhetoric is unhelpful, oftentimes misplaced, and overlooks current limitations in both the technology and the environment in which influence operations actors actually operate. I also hope to at least help inform a path forward towards tackling the abuse of generative AI within influence operations as this technology continues to proliferate. So I'm going to kind of break this down loosely into 7 sections. The first few kind of pretty brief, and then getting into more detail in the later ones. So I'll give a quick overview for those not aware or too familiar with the space of cyber-enabled influence operations and kind of common TTPs we've historically seen as part of these operations. Then I'll give a quick overview of the generative AI space, which I'm presuming a lot of you are very familiar with, just kind of consuming kind of day-to-day media these days. I'll give a short recent history of generative AI and influence operations, so where we've actually seen those overlap in recent years. Then I'll briefly touch on what is the current nature of the conversation about the implications of generative AI for influence operations. And then I'll start going into some of what I believe are some of the more nuanced takes on these implications that are often overlooked in the current conversation. And as an extension of that, I will then talk about where I at least see Gen AI being the biggest threat in the near to medium term. I'll talk about where I think generative AI may be particularly problematic in enhancing threat capabilities and effectiveness. That is where I would choose to focus kind of my energies as I try to tackle this. And then I'll finish up with some ways that I think about how we can go about actually detecting and mitigating the use of generative AI in influence operations. So with that, I'll jump in very quickly to an overview of cyber-enabled influence ops. any of you that have studied kind of the influence operations space, information operations, disinformation, will know that there's really no widely agreed upon definition of what actually constitutes an influence operation. But for the purposes of this discussion, I'm referring to covert efforts to manipulate or influence audiences online through deceptive means. This is often, but not exclusively, for political or ideological purposes. And there have also been many instances of economic and kind of personal motivations driving influence activity as well. This often involves the creation and dissemination of disinformation, that is, false information that's knowingly false. But an influence operation does not actually have to constitute the use of disinformation to be classed as an influence operation. A very easy example of this is hack and leak operations, which strategically leak true content that is being stolen as part of a compromise. So there is often an overlap, but it's important not to just kind of conflate disinformation and I/O as the same thing. And finally, I use the term cyber-enabled here pretty loosely to include not only activity that incorporates what we might consider traditional cyber threat activity, such as hack and leak operations, but also the more kind of generic online news and social media-based campaigns that have kind of received a lot of attention in recent years. So please keep that in mind as well. So what has I/O, as defined there, traditionally looked like? There's a ton of different TTPs, campaigns, operations that have occurred. I can't cover the entire scope of the space, but for the purposes of kind of what we're talking about today, I wanted to hone in on a couple of kind of TTPs that are relevant here. So firstly, false personas on social media platforms and websites that are used to spread content and amplify narratives. The creation of falsified news articles, fabricating official-looking correspondence or other documents, such as correspondence between government officials, or fabricating other content, for example, kind of newscasts, news broadcasts, that support particular narratives. Impersonating real people, particularly journalists, this is really common, and news organizations, as well as other organizations such as NGOs, to promote fabricated material or narratives. A big trend over recent years has been the co-opting of unwitting individuals to create or disseminate content, fabrications, and narratives. For example, hiring unwitting individuals to actually author content under the guise of kind of the person hiring them being a legitimate news entity. Or even conducting targeted outreach to real journalists. This is a really common one, particularly with hack and leak operations, where to try and gain traction, threat actors will try to reach out to a legitimate dissemination channel, such as a journalist, pitching it as a scoop to try and get quick uptake out there and into the public. You also see often impersonation of academics and policymakers and so on. And invitations to collaborate on projects or disseminate content on threat actors' behalf. There was a talk yesterday talking about this in the kind of North Korean context, right, of reaching out to researchers and saying, hey, look, I'm dealing with this thing, can you help? We see that in the I/O space as well, pretty regularly. Hack and leak operations I've mentioned, data stolen via cyber intrusions, which is released strategically to support a particular narrative. Classic example of this is the 2016 DNC leaks as part of the large Russian orchestrated campaign against the presidential elections. This includes real data, as I mentioned, often, but in other instances, it's actually seeded with falsified data as well. The random document or folder that's inserted into an authentic leak in order to then highlight attention to that and use that to reinforce the narrative that the threat actor is trying to push. And then we also see the compromise of websites and social media accounts to post fabrications and other content. Compromising legitimate news websites and posting fake articles on there. We've seen that a lot with a campaign called Ghostwriter historically, where the threat actors were kind of accessing the back-end CMS systems and uploading falsified articles and doing so in a way that wasn't alerting the actual administrators of the websites. And so then they had a link to an authentic news website that they could spread out on social media. That would generate attention, and it would be deemed authentic by the audience because it's appearing on a legitimate website. So those are just some examples of kind of common TTPs we've seen over the last few years across a variety of I/O threat actors. So what about the Gen AI space? What are we talking about when we discuss generative AI? I mean, again, loose definitions here, but collectively, I'm just kind of talking about the universe of machine learning models and services and so on that are designed to generate synthetic content, which is also often referred to as synthetic media. Currently, these fall into 4 main buckets: image generation and manipulation. For example, GAN-based models. Style GAN has been out for a few years now. This is the kind of back-end engine for the site This Person Does Not Exist. If you go on that, you can generate kind of fake profile pictures or headshots of individuals that do not exist. It includes kind of the newer releases like Midjourney, which you may have seen, kind of Elliot Higgins, the founder and leader of Bellingcat, playing around with around the Trump indictments and putting out kind of these fabricated images of former President Trump being arrested. And it includes tooling like Stable Diffusion. There's video generation. Again, this can be the wholesale generation of video from nothing, or manipulation, taking some existing video and manipulating it using AI models. A lot of that, what we see in the I/O space, is kind of manipulating facial expressions to present somebody as kind of saying something they didn't. A classic example of this last year is Russia's fabrication of a video of Ukrainian President Zelensky capitulating, to Russia in the ongoing conflict. This is also kind of where the term deepfake first emanated, specifically with regards to kind of the creation of fabricated pornographic videos. And so that term has now kind of moved into the mainstream. People throw this around a lot to kind of refer to any kind of synthetic media. I think we should be careful of that. For a number of reasons, but be aware that term is often used to kind of describe this kind of space holistically. There's obviously the text generation side of things, large language models, right? We've got OpenAI's ChatGPT, we've got Google Bard, we've got Anthropic Claude, right? We've got the open source Facebook Llama or Meta Llama model that's out there now as well. A lot of the buzz around Gen AI that you see in public discussion revolves around LLMs. And it's important to remember that's just one component of this broader Gen AI space. And then finally, we've got audio generations. Of particular concern to us here are voice generations, which can be, again, kind of text-to-voice based approaches of just, type something in and create a narrative, a voice that's unattributed to any particular person, or actively using training models and using text-to-voice to impersonate a real person. A few years ago now, 2020, me and a colleague, Phil Tarley at Mandiant, did a Black Hat talk on this, where we were playing around with various Gen AI models kind of 3 years ago now, and we impersonated Tom Hanks's voice. It was a very kind of crappy, cloning, but we did that on a laptop overnight using just a few small snippets from YouTube of him speaking, right? And you scale up that training data, these can become much more effective. So image generation, video generation, manipulation, text generation, audio generation. So what about the recent history of generative AI and influence operations? I think the turning point, at least for me, actively looking at influence campaigns was in 2019 when we really started to 2019 when we really started to see a uptick in the use of style GAN generated images for the purpose of backstopping social media platforms. Seen this across numerous actors, everything from Cuba to China is prolific using this, to even non-state actors, organizations that were pushing ideologically motivated narratives, were kind of disseminating these through online personas, which they used artificially generated profile pictures for to make it more difficult, presumably, for threat investigators to be able to identify them as being fake. Historically, it was very straightforward to go to a social media account, take that profile picture, reverse image search it, and find the real person it belonged to. And the use of these style GAN models really kind of did away with that in many instances. Since then, we've seen increasing kind of manipulation of video content in particular to undermine political rivals. I mentioned the Zelensky video earlier. That's a classic example of that. We've also seen kind of the more almost parody type ones, or almost trolling, as it were. Like, it's obviously fake because you've taken a scene from a famous movie and you've superimposed your political rival's face onto that, right? An example that we found at Midjourney was, I think it was Mexico, if I remember off the top of my head, putting the face of a presidential candidate onto a video of Al Pacino doing cocaine. So is that The Godfather or Scarface? That's the one. Thank you. I was blanking for a minute there. So there you go, right? And it's like, it's obviously fake, right? They're not trying to hide that, but it's a classic example there of kind of using these technologies and how that's kind of evolved. We've also seen the use of generative AI to kind of create things like news broadcasts, right? Effectively fabricating a news anchor to push content and narratives. And then on the tech side, not much yet in the I/O space, although text-based kind of content is the most difficult to detect if the threat actors have done any kind of baseline work to kind of mask it. However, there have been incidents like recently the organization NewsGuard found a network of websites that were using LLMs to rewrite legitimate political content, news content. So they were taking this off of real news websites, basically running it through an LLM to rewrite it, and then posting it as their own. So it's like plagiarism, basically. But the apparent motive there perhaps being to, again, kind of backstop these websites, right? Make them look legitimate and potentially monetize it as well, right? Because the content looks authentic. And then there's also obviously the voice side of things. We've started to see the use of voice cloning particularly in cybercrime contexts, right? Your kind of classic impersonating an executive or a family member or whatever it may be to kind of siphon money out of an organization. I don't think, off the top of my head, I can't recall any specific kind of influence operation examples that aren't also kind of linked to video generations and manipulations. But this is something I would also be increasingly concerned about. So we've kind of been seeing this uptick for the past 4 years. And I think now it's only really starting to accelerate again with kind of the open sourcing of so many of these capabilities. So very briefly, what is the current conversation of around Gen AI and I/O? I mean, you probably see this if you read anything about this space, right? It's kind of the end of the world, deep despair. You know, this is going to change everything. You can't believe anything that's out there now because it's all going to be fake. Liar's dividend, if you've never heard of that term, that's the idea that now that everything out there is fake, I can basically do something bad and then say, well, that was fabricated, that was a deep fake, so, you know, right, and it kind of gets me out of responsibility, as it were, for that. So it's really one of there's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty and doubt. FUD is a kind of common term in the disinfo space. And much of it is actually legitimate, right? And I want to be clear before I jump into some kind of nuances here that I myself see this as a major threat, right? And I don't want us to dismiss that at all. But I also want to make sure that the conversation isn't unnecessarily kind of over the top. And I think the previous speaker kind of also mentioned a motivation of this. So I want to kind of talk about a few things that I think about in terms of where I think the conversation misses the mark or misses some of the nuance. Said at the outset that there's nuances around this and how to deal with it that are overlooked. Now, the points I'm going to raise here are not exhaustive at all. We could have hours of debate about this, but they represent some of the major issues that I've given significant thought to with regards to the current conversation and how kind of the threat has evolved so far. So number one, in terms of what does the conversation miss? Often it conflates the concepts of human-created versus artificially generated with those of true versus false and real versus fake. And these are not the same thing. And the conflation, in my opinion, causes a lot of attention to be paid to aspects of the threat that I would argue in many cases are actually less important. There's a tendency to equate artificially generated content with somehow being fake, fabricated, or falsified. And while this is often the case, it is also frequently not the case. Gen AI is ultimately a production tool for content creation. Some kind of a new tool in the quiver, as it were. So I think we should be careful not to kind of automatically assign moral, ethical value, or frankly even importance judgments to any output without deeper interrogation. Great example of this, this was actually on a slide yesterday, if you went to the Gen AI on Russia and China talk, a recent report Microsoft released about a Chinese influence campaign they're tracking that is using Gen AI. And one of these images, again, you can look this up, is this kind of artistic picture of the Statue of Liberty holding a semi-automatic rifle, right? And kind of, pitching this as, America talks about democracy, but this is what it is really. And a lot of the conversation around that image, again, you can look it up, talked about the fact that the hand holding the torch has 6 fingers on it. A clear indication that this was artificially generated. And it is, right? So it's a great indicator for us. But I think incidents like that are not particularly meaningful in terms of discussions around content being used to deceive or convince or trick or fool audiences. Nor is it inherently important to the traction of that content, right? At the end of the day, this was an artistic image. The threat actors could have easily, maybe not easily, but they also could have just commissioned somebody to draw this up, right? And it was obviously generated based on the prompt that they had given the generating model. And so there's a lot of talk about, well, this didn't fool anyone. It's obviously fake. It doesn't matter, right? That's not where its effectiveness comes from. It comes from the message that it's trying to push. And in that context, the Gen AI component is an aside. It's very interesting to us as analysts. It's very interesting to those of us who a few years ago were saying threat actors are going to use these technologies in their campaigns, but it inherently doesn't mean it's somehow more malicious or nefarious or kind of more likely to fool someone, because at the end of the day, it's a political cartoon, right? This is a very different conversation if we're talking about fabricated photos or videos of actual real people or incidents or whatever it may be, right? A political cartoon of me, kind of irrelevant if it's AI generated or, hand-drawn. A photo of me or a video of me up here doing something that I didn't do, like that's a different story, right? That's when we can start to really kind of equate artificially generated with fake or false. Number 2, where does the conversation miss? I think there's actually still an over-indexing on generative AI producing content that is more convincing or realistic as being the crux of the threat, when there are numerous instances of believability or realism not really mattering that much in the context of generating impact. Again, I'm not dismissing this as a real threat, but there are nuances around how information threats often play out. Classic example of this, any of you see the AI-generated picture of the Pentagon explosion a few months ago? Some random guy on Twitter posted it, and it kind of went from there. And ultimately, the conversation around an explosion at the Pentagon caused a stock market dip, right? So there was a real-world impact of this. Now, if you look at the image, to me, it looks like somebody kind of bred a University of Alabama frat house, kind of the giant pillars and all of that, onto the front of a 1970s DC apartment building. It's completely unconvincing, right? It's obviously not the Pentagon to anybody who knows anything about the Pentagon. And I need to kind of, I think there needs to be kind of a lot of post-mortem done about this particular case. But I would argue in that the effect of the Gen AI component itself was more on the margins, and it was the actual online conversation about an explosion at the Pentagon that actually had the material impact. There's a kind of analogous case back in, I think, 2012, I want to say, when the AP Twitter account was hacked to say that there'd been an explosion at the White House, and that caused a temporary stock market dip as well, right? It's the message. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd be very surprised if there was some trader sitting in the New York Stock Exchange that looked at that image of the Pentagon explosion and then made any sort of trading decision based on that. What I suspect happened is all of the social ingesting tools that traders use picked up the message that there was an explosion, and that triggered the cascade in the stock market, right? So some effect there of the picture on the margins, because obviously people were talking about it. But again, you could have photoshopped that image, right? And probably done a lot better job as well if you had. So the fact that it was AI generated is interesting to us as analysts, but let's not kind of lose sight of the big picture here behind this. And there's a term in the industry related to this called cheap fakes. It's kind of almost become a cliche in the IO research industry, but there is a lot of merit to it. It's this idea basically that content only has to be good enough to get buy-in from a specific target audience to have an effect. And to be honest, many of these audiences will actually twist anything to their pre-existing beliefs, even the absence of evidence whatsoever, right? So you don't need AI-generated content to influence certain communities who are kind of prone to actually want to kind of believe things in the extreme. So Gen AI will continue to make fabrications more believable, but it's important we understand that it's not the same thing as them being more effective at a kind of surface level. It's really going to depend on the specific content, domain, incident, or event. Number 3, what does the conversation miss? While generative AI helps reduce, not solve, the content scaling problem for threat actors, that is, they can mass produce content at scale, it doesn't inherently solve the traction problem. I like to think of the information space as a market economy where the currency is effectively eyeballs, right? Not literally, but figuratively, right? You're competing for attention out there in the information space. As such, even if you're using AI to generate content, you still need to open and maintain effective channels of distribution for generated content. And the conversation also overlooks that while IO threat actors will be using Gen AI to kind of mass scale content online, so will every other actor seeking to leverage Gen AI for generating attention online. Think about scam artists, search engine optimization manipulators, spammers and low-quality content farms, advertisers in the broader ad tech industry, and even legitimate content producers such as journalists, websites, and blogs. There was a lot of press about BuzzFeed, right? You know, deciding they're going to move to a Gen AI kind of content generation approach and laying off a bunch of staff, right? Everybody who has something to gain from promoting content online will start adopting the use of these models. So you are, as a threat actor, competing still in that attention space, right? The audience is still the same size. Now there's just all that extra kind of crap you have to wade through, right? And so the distribution side of things becomes all the more important. Great example of this is the China campaign referred to in the industry as spamouflage dragon, and Mandiant calls it Dragon Bridge as well, which has been prolific in terms of just thousands and thousands of online assets. Accounts on dozens of platforms, YouTube videos, the kind of fake news broadcasts, all of this stuff. And so far, they've really struggled to get attention and traction, right? And I'd argue it's not really about the believability, as it were, in the content or the flaws in, grammatical presentation. It can be a bit, but, a lot of people, just authentic people, do not speak well online, right? So that in itself is not necessarily going to create disengagement. The message doesn't resonate. Then they're not effective at maintaining these distribution channels and managing those. Now, that campaign is getting better at this now, so that's important to remember. But this is an issue for these actors, regardless of whether they're using AI or not. Now, it can be used to help reduce the traction problem, but that will require a whole other level of effort. For example, creating artificial conversations that kind of create kind of grassroots campaigns and kind of rope people in. But that itself is challenging right now. Why? Because number 4, what does the conversation miss? The clunkiness and unreliability of current Gen AI and the limitations that are built in actually make it very difficult to scale content effectively, particularly if you care about not getting caught. This takes a number of forms. Inherent unreliability in the APIs and surface offerings. For example, I've done a lot of work in kind of generating politically motivated news and fake news, as it were, using OpenAI's API. It's constantly throwing exceptions, right? The servers are overwhelmed. It's dying left, right, and center. You have to actually code in all the exceptions to handle this, unless you want to sit there literally watching it produce its generations and then jump in as soon as it throws an error. It's because it's just kind of clunky right now. And so to generate at scale, you need to be technically sophisticated enough to handle these exceptions or have that human monitoring component. You also need to bypass the guardrails put in by these companies. That is actually very easy right now, but my hope is that will rapidly improve. For example, the OpenAI API will throw moral objections to the creation of fake news to me. Now, you can obviously kind of prompt engineer that, to try and kind of go around it. Or you can just actually resubmit your prompt, and it will serve up the answer. It's extremely unreliable. So when I was doing this at scale, I was literally just building in an exception, like in a for loop, basically saying, if this output is only of length 1, just ignore it and repeat the process, because length 1 meant it was throwing that objection. I didn't even have to look at it, right? So there's very easy to brute force this. Again, if you care about your content not being outed, you need constant human-in-the-loop auditing to ensure it doesn't leave context clues behind. That NewsGuard investigation I mentioned, where they found the sites using AI tools to rewrite legitimate content, they found it because of that generic, as an AI model, I can't do this, blah, 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 kind of clause. Some of their outputs were throwing in, and the threat actors just never actually looked at that, so they didn't realize it was all an automated pipeline. So if you want to avoid that, you have to have eyes on it. There's things like token caps, right? OpenAI limits you to 4,096 tokens. Think of tokens as kind of word components, as it were. What that materially means is you can't produce any content from a single API call that's beyond 800 to 1,000 words, right? So you're limited there. You can't kind of build super long form pieces of content unless you kind of piece them together. And also, it really struggles with instructions. Producing content of certain length. Effectively, what these models are doing are reverting to their most representative amalgamation of that training data. This is why a lot of generations at kind of mass scale end up looking very similar, right? Because they're reducing the variability in the outputs inherently. That's what these models are designed to do. So I've done this before. Again, I took real news headlines, and I fed them into the GPT API to produce fake news headlines, and I compared the articles they produced to the real articles. What I found in it, a massive proportion of them, like maybe even 50%, I don't have the exact number, a lot of them kind of over-sensationalized and editorialized in the very first sentence. They say things like, in a stunning revelation, in a unbelievable act, in a blah, 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 blah. And in fact, one of the kind of simple rules you could write to detect this was just see, is the first word of the article in? And if so, you're going to detect a massive amount of this, right? So how do you get around that? You've got to do a lot of prompt engineering or fine-tuning, which is a lot of work. Now, if you don't care about just spamming stuff out there, these constraints go away, but a lot of times you do. And so finally, creating truly unique, difficult to identify kind of as AI-generated content at scale still requires technical sophistication at this stage, right? This will change as the models improve, obviously. But right now, it's just not this kind of one-click approach, and then, boom, you've got a campaign. If you want to fine-tune, especially kind of, take advantage of something like Llama, that doesn't have the guardrails built in. Fine-tuning basically is, you've got kind of the pre-trained model, right? So take GPT or Llama GPT, you can fine-tune now, or 3.5 you can. It's designed to create these generations. Well, you can actually teach it to create specific types of generations, right? You can feed it thousands of news articles and say, write a news article like this. That's the fine-tuning component. You're taking the vendors have done most of the work. You're just tuning it to do this one kind of task extra well. But to do that, that takes technical expertise. That's not straightforward. So again, if you're looking to kind of create unique content at scale, you need that sophistication. So where do I see Gen AI enhancing threat actor capabilities over the near to medium term again? I think it makes attribution more difficult. Certainly we've caught campaigns or kind of got our first lead on certain kind of textual-based constructs or spelling or grammatical errors that are common to non-native speakers of English. For example, Russian actors using particular words, pretending to be either English-speaking or even like Ukrainian, and they use the wrong words. So attribution may be more difficult on that side of things, or at least kind of getting that clue as to who might be responsible. I worry about low-volume targeted generations into specific communities, journalists. The type of thing that can make crowdsourced debunking very difficult. That obviously comes at the expense of speed of dissemination, though. I mentioned earlier, seeding synthetic conversations to generate grassroots movements, right? Creating kind of artificial conversations that get people talking. Targeted lures for advancing dissemination narratives via legitimized platforms. That's one people commonly talk about. And what I mean there is like, advanced spear phishing to gain access to that legitimate website, news website, that you can put your generated article up on. And in the grand scheme of things, they do improve the scale, effectiveness, and believability of what I call cursory glance content. This is kind of, you're going through your social feeds and you're quickly seeing an image, or you're seeing that video snippet, right? That to me is the higher risk area than the long form text, because again, in our attention economy, who's actually reading all of that anyway? I'd argue the kind of thing you're just seeing, scrolling through Twitter or TikTok is kind of the place where I see these generations being most problematic. We'll see them continuing backstopping kind of online assets, profiles, kind of fake websites and things like that. And then just the general undermining in the quality of and reducing trust in the general information environment, that whole seeding chaos thing. There will be actors that just spam stuff out there, right? It's going to make it, a huge mess. So thinking about detecting and mitigating use of AI, I've only got 5 minutes here, so I'll try to breeze through this. I'll start with what I think won't be effective long term. And that is automated detection models. The current state of them is awful, and they're getting worse. They do work in narrow contexts, and I've built them myself. I've built detectors for artificially generated text, image generations, and so on. But there's kind of 3 key issues that limit the effectiveness here. Number 1, any detector is going to be specific to the generative model used to create the actual content. A great example of this, again, is StyleGAN. LinkedIn recently released, in conjunction with UC Berkeley, details about a model they're using to detect StyleGAN-generated fake profile pictures on LinkedIn accounts. And got like 99.6% accurate or something. It's awesome, right? Great at that job. And then it's less than 1% accuracy on any diffusion-generated images. What do you have to do? You have to go and redo that whole process with Stable Diffusion. You have to do it with every generative model because they're selecting different features in the generations. And so you can't just take your generic detector for StyleGAN and apply it to another domain. It doesn't work. Second, detection on the training data. The detection is training data specific itself. And I mean this in a domain context first. For example, let's say I'm building a text-based generator for detecting artificially generated political news. Well, I need a whole bunch of real political news. You know, it's kind of my first class. I need a bunch of generated news, right? If I create a whole bunch of generations of like fake student papers or marketing blurb or whatever, when I build that model, it's going to perform awesome on my test set because the two sets are completely different, the real and the artificially generated. But now when I go out and collect real data of political news and I throw that into my my detection model, it's probably going to say it's real. Why? Because the features my crummy detector was picking up on was not syntactic and structural differences in how the documents are actually constructed. It was the content, right? Because at the end of the day, these models are all about predicting words and their relation to each other. So if all of my kind of fake data is talking about something completely unrelated to my domain, it's going to be meaningless. And this in itself kind of presents the third problem, this asymmetry between training data and actual generations threat actors are using, right? Like, how do I go and actually generate both a realistic, or collect a real set of data and generate a representative example of generated data that is similar to the type of generations the threat actors are using? That's an extremely difficult task unless I have access to their actual models, their actual training data, right? Or I manage to break open a campaign and find all that, all that data and can figure out a way to do that. That creates this huge asymmetry there. These detectors are basically unreliable in any general sense. Even OpenAI kind of did away with theirs. There's been a bunch of academic studies that show you can't really generalize these. They will be useful in narrow contexts. But I don't think the solution to this is focus on building generic detectors because there's just too much variation in the data sets threat actors are using and the actual way the models work as well. And this becomes an even bigger problem with the fine-tuning issues. I don't think adding friction to the service acquisition kind of process will have that much effect. It's not scalable, it's easily abused. What I mean there is things like verifying who your customers are. Obviously, state actors are very adept at, working around those kind of constraints. So I don't think there's much there. Regulation, I think, is a mixed bag. It really depends on what we mean when we talk about regulation. I think the straight prohibition of certain outputs is unfeasible, short of completely banning AI. Because, for example, if you tell these generators, like, well, if you produce fake political news, we're shutting you down. How do you even detect that, right? It's the same detection issues I've just talked about, and the scale we're talking about is just not feasible. However, requiring guardrails, I think, can stall abuse, but there needs to be an understanding that they will fail, and they will be bypassed by threat actors, and that they will constantly need to be iterated on. This is really analogous to the broader issues we face in defensive cybersecurity, right? Constantly having to kind of adapt to the threat actors. So improving guardrails and constraints, even things like token limits or spending caps may have some effect. But where I think effort should be best applied is first, investing in analyst expertise within the influence operations domain. So many of the campaigns me and my former teams have caught have been because an expert was looking at something and said, this is weird, right? It doesn't make sense from the standpoint of who this person purports to be for them to be pushing this narrative, right? It was that expertise that then allowed us to hone in. It wasn't kind of mistakes in the content itself. So continuing to invest in that expertise. I don't think general education of the populace is going to do much good beyond the kind of cheap fakes I mentioned, right? Teach them about the technology, teach them about the Pentagon incident, but like you're not going to teach everybody how to, kind of know that something Iran is saying is, kind of against their political, interests or something like that. And then finally, continue to focus on disrupting dissemination. channels, educating journalists, social media trust and safety teams, and so on, right? We're not going to tackle this at the content generation side, I don't think. It's going to be on the dissemination, amplification side where we can have the most effect, right? I went way over time, like a minute, but I'm happy to stick around for questions for everyone. But thank you for sticking with me this morning.